This is Gilbert Gottfried, and this is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Frank Santopadre. We're once again recording at Nutmeg with our engineer, Frank Verderosa. Our guest this week is a musician, songwriter, a 2009 inductee into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the lead guitarist of one of the most popular and influential bands in rock history, Metallica. He's also co-writer of several of the band's signature hits, including Fade to Black, Master of Puppets, and Enter Sandman. And he's been named one of Rolling Stone's 100 greatest rock guitarists of all time. As a boy, he developed a keen interest in horror and science fiction movies, including the original Frankenstein, which led to a lifelong quest to acquire artifacts and memorabilia celebrating the movies he loved. In his 2012 hardcover book, Too Much Horror Business, features more than 300 images of the vast collection of horror movie memorabilia he's amassed over the course of 3 decades, including toys, masks, models, artwork, even original costumes worn by Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. And his terrific follow-up book, It's Alive, features dozens of horror and sci-fi movie posters from his personal collection, including rare posters from Frankenstein, Nosferatu, and The Mummy. Please welcome to the show one of the most accomplished musicians of the rock era, a fellow Monster Kid, and most importantly, a man who shares our love of the Black Cat, Kirk Hammett.
Howdy.
Kirk, welcome.
Wow, that's quite an intro, Gilbert. You're kind of making me blush there for a second.
The lengthy intros have become part of the show, Kirk.
Yeah,
I like it.
They double as an obituary.
Well, that's great. Now I kind of I got an example of how it might end up.
See, here's something I have a hard time putting together, because I remember people telling me you should get Kirk Hammett on this show.
Yeah, lots of people.
From Metallica. And I said, from Metallica? Why? And I thought, and they said he's the biggest old monster movie freak there is. His collection is insane. And so how, the world of hard rock and nerdy guys buying
he straddles both of those worlds.
It's weird, because in your rock world, you get laid. And I don't think you do that in, getting one of the electrodes that Glenn Strange wore.
Well, Glenn Strange turns women on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I started getting into the horror thing from a very, very young age. I mean, I felt the draw, the attraction when I was 5 years old. And that it was when I had seen my very first horror movie, which is Day of the Triffids. And, it never waned from that moment on, from seeing that movie to right this second. It's never waned. I've always been attracted to this genre because it just feels so fun, so great, and so comfortable, and so relatable. And, this is my very first love, the horror genre, and music came a lot later. So to tell you the truth, this was my world that I lived in as a child. It was just a complete world that I created for myself. Reading all these comic books, reading all the monster magazines, seeing the movies, watching the Saturday night horror shows that are on TV.
Were you a creature features guy too, Kirk?
Bob Wilkins was my
Bob
hero.
Wilkins, right, the local horror host.
Yep, San Francisco.
On the east side, we had Zachary.
Zachary. Well, you know Zachary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we lost him recently.
Yeah. In fact, Zachary pretty much had the best description for the type of music I played, and he called it that plugged-in music.
That plugged-in music. I love
it. To this day, that description is just close to my heart because it's it's very accurate. Actually,
it's apt.
I remember I grew up reading Famous Monsters of Filmland.
Yes,
and I had two things that I bought from the magazine. One, the Frankenstein poster.
Is that the poster that you still have?
Yeah.
In the house?
Yeah.
He's got it in the living room.
And in the magazine, they make it like they're sending Frankenstein to your home. And then you go, it's a poster. But it's in a frame in the living room now. I kept it for years. The other thing I have, also a complete ripoff, was Herman the Asiatic Insect. Now, this in the picture, you see a little kid open a box and an enormous monster with fangs and claws and tentacles leap out, and people are screaming in terror. So I sent away for that, and it's a little tiny box about an inch long with a tiny stick in it, like an ice cream stick that has some fuzz glued on it and a rubber band for antennas. and that's Herman the Asiatic Insect.
Does that ring a bell with you, Kirk?
Absolutely. I remember seeing the ad in Captain Company. And that ad, it was like you were sending away for like some genie in a bottle, but it was, horrible Herman in a box. And I remember years later finally seeing one of those things and opening it up and thinking, oh my God, horrible Herman, you're so not horrible.
Did you do the sea monkey thing too?
Oh yeah, I had numerous sea monkey adventures. They always died on me.
Yeah, the brine
you're
shrimp.
Supposed to let them. Yeah, you're supposed to let them grow. From like Monday to Friday, but by Wednesday, mine would all be floating at the top of the water. I don't know what went wrong.
And they didn't have crowns or robes or anything,
like in the picture.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
they didn't have a big throne they sat in.
Exactly, and faces. I was expecting these things, to be swimming around with like totally human features and whatnot, being able to like look at me and interact. I remember seeing an ad, and it wasn't in Famous Monsters, but it was in some other magazine, and it said 12-foot tall monster from space, 25 cents. And I thought, wow, this is too good to be true. And so I sent my 25 cents in. I remember like 3 months later, this package came and it was a tube. And I was like, what is this? And I remember opening it up and thinking, poster? I didn't order a poster. And then unrolling it, and it's the picture of the 12-foot space monster. They never told you that it was, a poster. I thought it was some like 3-dimensional sort of figure. But when you're 7.5 years old,
of
8
course.
years old, you're expecting the world.
25 cents isn't bad for a poster, though.
Yeah.
One thing we've discussed on this show, but I don't think could be discussed enough. They would advertise you could buy monkeys.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that with Joe Dante.
Yes.
And a totally crooked operation. Yeah. And when you got the package, I heard the monkeys, there was no laws on the books, maybe, but the monkeys would be sent to these kids who were and the monkey would either be dying or dead when it got to the kid's house.
Wow, so they actually did send a real live monkey.
That's what we hear.
Yes.
That's what we hear. We had the director Joe Dante here, and he disputed it, but
I've seen ads for it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
horrible.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I remember looking at a lot of that Captain Company stuff and thinking, wow, all this stuff is really cool. But, I grew up a poor kid. So, I would always stare at the Don Post magazines, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Don Post masks.
Masks. I mean, Don Post masks. And think, wow, these are the greatest masks in the world. But how am I going to afford $32.99? When it was a real struggle for me to just come up with 50 cents to buy Famous Monsters, every month or so.
Didn't your parents give you money for milk and lunch, and you would blow it on at the comic book shop and on Famous Monsters and Monster Times and all that stuff?
I would abstain from eating lunch.
Oh, jeez.
That's how dedicated he was.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, I grew up with a steady diet of Famous Monsters and Creepy Magazine, Eerie Magazine.
Yeah, Eerie, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Eerie and Creepy.
All that stuff. Yeah, and then later on Heavy Metal Magazine.
And I heard with the monster masks in the back of the magazine, they would actually apply makeup to the masks to make them look better.
Yeah. I always kind of suspected that they were too good looking to be true. And, if you see the masks nowadays, the actual ones, I could see how they would have augmented the masks themselves. But one thing that they did do that none of the kids ever even knew about is when they wore the mask in the pictures, they put blackout around their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when a kid would get these masks and put them on without the blackout, it was so obvious that they were, wearing a mask because you could see the flesh around the eyes coming through, and it wasn't quite the same effect as it was when you're looking at the picture in the magazine.
You were an outcast. You call yourself an outcast kid, Kirk. That you and you related to the monsters. You felt, and Gilbert, you've mentioned this on previous shows, that you felt sympathy.
Oh, yeah.
For the monsters, and it was an emotion that you developed early by watching monster movies.
Because it was always Frankenstein's the most obvious. He's a little kid. He doesn't know about the world, and he just wants to be loved and have friends. The Wolfman's like adolescence, where your whole body is changing and you're growing hair and you're sounding different, and you don't know why this is happening.
This is a theory he spent years developing, Kirk.
And then Dracula is what every guy wants to be. Yeah,
Absolutely.
he's
a seducer.
the cool guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you hit it on the spot on all of those. I always liked the Mummy too because the Mummy struggled with trying to communicate, and he always was so slow and lumbering, and it's amazing that he actually caught anyone because he moved so slowly.
Yes, we've talked about that on the show. But you didn't have a stage of life for the Mummy. I guess it was old age.
Yeah, I guess
the Mummy would be the
arthritic.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that you guys both had that moment, that turning point moment where you felt such sympathy and compassion for the monster. You were what, Kirk, 5 when you watched Frankenstein?
5 or 6 years old.
6 years old with your dad.
Yeah, and I did, and there was something just that I could relate to just right off the bat. It's this guy who just wants to be loved, and he wants to understand, why he's there, and he's looking for the right father figure, but he keeps on getting rejected, from the father figure and humanity as a whole, and in a micro sort of way, I kind of maybe have felt that as a 6-year-old, but I definitely felt that later on growing up. I felt socially kind of awkward, and being a shy kid, it was just easy for me to relate to these characters because they were stumbling through life with all these obstacles in front of them, and that's how my own life felt.
You relate to that, Gil, being an introverted kid and
absolutely.
a withdrawn kid?
Absolutely. Yeah, you identify with the monster in those movies. And the earliest monster movie I remember seeing is The Indestructible Man with
Lon Chaney, yeah.
Yes.
and Robert Shane, who was the inspector
On
from
Superman.
Joe Flynn from McHale's Navy, and Max Showalter.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize at the time that Chaney Jr. was like scary for the wrong reasons at that point in his life.
Yeah.
He's the world's biggest Lon Chaney Jr. fan, Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I have a lot of respect for Lon Chaney Jr. too, but he eventually did become that character in Mice and Men.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's quite good in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. But yeah, I particularly liked Lon Chaney Jr. and the Wolfman. For me, I mean that's just like his classic performance. And I really like him as Count Alucard too.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. I love that movie so much.
I have a son, and my wife wanted to give him a middle name with an A in it from one of her relatives. And I was pressuring her to name him Alucard.
I love that.
She didn't go along with it, but I would have loved to have had a son named Count Alucard.
I would have loved that too. You got Max into horror movies pretty early.
Yes. When he was really little, I would say, okay, who played Frankenstein? He'd go, Boris Karloff. and then the Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr. And then and Bela Lugosi.
You made sure he said Bela.
Yes,
right, you made,
yes.
Right. You have two sons, Kirk. How old are your sons
Yes,
now?
I do.
How old are they now?
9 and 11, and they're constantly asking me when they can watch certain horror movies. And I'm like thinking, well, how old was I when I watched this kind of movie? And I always think way too early. And so they asked me, when can I see Hellraiser, Dad? And I'm thinking, Hellraiser. This kid's 9 years old.
Yeah, it's intense.
I don't know if they need to be seeing a movie about sexual satanic demons from hell.
Maybe a little young.
I think, 14 maybe. And they're like, how about 12?
You could watch
13.
them. Let them watch the Universal classics, though.
Oh yeah, they've seen Dracula, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, but their favorite, and I'm not surprised, is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
There you go.
I love so much.
We've spoken a million times about that on this show. That's a great movie.
Oh, I love it.
Speaking of Glenn Strange.
Yeah. And, I really like Bela Lugosi's performance in that movie as well. I mean, you can tell that he was so happy to be back playing Count Dracula that, every time he's on screen, he just soaks it for so much, atmosphere and vibe. At least that's what I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And, like you said, Glenn Strange, he made such a great monster. I mean, his facial structure just added so much to it. Every nook and cranny in his face just really augmented the character a lot.
And the funny thing to me is they weren't using Lugosi back around that time in regular horror films.
What's that, 46? Abbott
Yeah,
and Costello Meet Frankenstein?
Yeah, 46, 47, yeah.
Yeah.
And they used Carradine, who was terrific. He's a great actor. But boy, when you see Lugosi in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, you go, this is what was missing from the other movies.
Absolutely, I agree. John Carradine, I think, is a great, amazing actor, but I don't know why that decision was made. And they should. The thing about Bela Lugosi is that he was just so much himself. Every time he walked out on screen, you were just like, there he is, he's on screen, and he just dominated the whole room, And I think that kind of like held him back in the end, especially with the Dracula role. But I agree, he should have been in all those movies. House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein.
Yeah, he is what's missing. He is what's missing from them, for sure. Speaking of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, tell Gilbert, and it's in the book, it's in Too Much Horror Business, what you have. You have the masks that Bud and Lou wore.
Yeah, the scene where they're about to go to a Halloween costume ball.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they put on two masks, paper mache masks. One of them is of a werewolf. Another one is of some ghoulish kind of vampire looking character. Those were found about 5 or 10 years ago, and I saw them in an auction. And oh my God, I couldn't believe that those things were still around. And I managed to acquire them, and so those made it into the book. And
fantastic.
Also, the Wolfman head that's in the book is also from Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and it took a long time to verify that, but once we were able to authenticate it that it was indeed from that movie, I was very, very happy because to have one prop from any of those Universal movies is incredible. To have two is great. To have actually three pieces, I am in heaven.
They're great things to own. I read an interview with you in Collectors Weekly, and this is interesting, Kirk. And you said one of the ways that you acquire this stuff was to get in touch with people who worked on those Universal films. But are these heirs? I mean, these people aren't alive. How do you go digging for stuff like that?
Well, some of them were heirs, some of them were relatives of the people who actually, worked on this stuff and had this stuff.
I see.
A lot of it I got pre-internet, which is just a lot of networking, just a lot of investigating, a lot of grilling people.
And I remember another moment where my son made me really proud. When he was 2 or something, he was sitting in a coffee shop with my wife, and he was staring at some guy sitting by himself in the corner. And he leans into my wife and he goes, "Mommy, that man looks like Lon Chaney Jr." And I said, I don't need DNA testing.
Perfect.
I love that.
And now I had almost a full collection. Frank and I were talking about the Aurora monster models.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you too. Was that the first thing? Was that the first item as a kid that you decided to start collecting? Was that the gateway drug, so to speak?
It was the beginning, and that it all started from me walking into the kitchen, and there was my brother and my cousin, and they were painting. They had bought the Frankenstein model, and they were painting it, and they were painting it all wrong. And I said to them, "What are you doing? Frankenstein isn't purple and orange and yellow and green." And I for years and years and years, I couldn't understand what that was all about until I just realized that they're on acid when they were painting. This is like 1968 or 1969. But when I saw the model, I was like, wow, they're doing a horrible job. And I ran to my mom and got some what was it like? What were they $1.25 or something
like that?
Yeah,
not much
borrowed
more.
The money from my mom. Went to the store, picked up a Aurora Frankenstein model and built it, and that was the beginning of the end, really. And I bought that particular model and every one of those models at least 6 or 7 times as a child, because I was constantly building them, painting them, and either blowing them up with firecrackers or setting them on fire or just doing something just absolutely destructive. I was it was just what I did with my
You
my
blew
stuff.
them up.
That's why I don't have anything left from my childhood.
That's too bad. Good thing you've had the scratch to replace them.
And I
Exactly.
remember also, aside from the famous Wolfman Frankenstein, all those, I remember my mother, she went to the store and she bought me, they had 2 together. And I guess it was cheaper. They were like attached together. And one of them was The Witch. That was just great. Yeah. And Bride of Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. That Bride of Frankenstein model was outrageously cool because the best thing for me about that Bride of Frankenstein model was there was a tray on the table with a human heart in it.
Oh, yes. She's on the slab.
Yes.
Right.
And
How cool.
there was that other one. Whoa. There was Forgotten Prisoner.
Right.
That was yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the other one, the whatever they called it. It was a box with different things to whatever the word is when you add to something. They would have like little model rats or skulls.
Oh, accessories.
Accessories.
Right.
And you could glue
The customizing kit.
Yes. And
Yes,
you
the
could
customizing
paint them
kit.
up and put them on your models that were already there.
Yeah.
And you had the glow in the dark ones, Kirk. What do they call those? The frightening lightning.
Yeah. They first came out as the Frightening Lightning, edition, and then they were just after that they were just straight on Aurora glow in the dark models, and I love those too because for me it opened up a whole new way of destroying them, which was in the dark.
So, Gil, you didn't blow yours up. You would sit there and get the glue and
Yes.
assemble and then painstakingly paint them. You did all that?
I would glue them, paint them.
I'm impressed.
I even would like put paint in the eyes. I would get like a pin and I'd put a little paint on it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I read those things were so popular. I guess 61, 62 that I hope this is true, that they were manufacturing them 24 hours a day to keep up with demand.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they had an amazing run. They were around for like a good 12, 15 years or something, and without very much alteration to from the original design. And so I would say they're pretty successful and they're still pretty popular to this day.
And then I heard that someone bought the molds of the Aurora models and tried to put it out themselves with the idiotic ad campaign rated X for excitement.
I don't even remember that.
So parents were going, I can't give my kid a porn model, They would see
It hurt sales. I had the King Kong.
Oh, I did too.
You had to paint the little Fay Ray that
Yes.
was in his hand, and I had the mummy. They weren't glow in the dark at first, right? That was a future edition.
That was later.
Later.
Yeah, that was later.
Yeah. God,
Yeah.
what wonderful times.
I always hated, though, like in the model, they told you to paint Frankenstein green. And when they make him look green in posters, because I think it's the makeup was green, but that was so it would look gray on screen.
Exactly. Mhm.
Let's talk. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Kirk.
There is a whole debate on that. Should Frankenstein be green? Should Frankenstein be ghostly pale? Should Frankenstein be bluish? Reddish? There's everyone has their preference. Personally, I can understand why people would want their Frankenstein to be green because that's just kind of like the popular sort of way to present him. But, I think it's more effective if he has more of a palish kind of ghostly, palish, greenish, bluish kind of pallor rather than straight green.
Yeah.
That's how I am.
It was always interesting when the Munsters went from black and white to color.
Yes.
To see what color they were going to be.
Yeah.
And then Herman was that sort of sickly green.
Yeah.
Not gray.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I got to ask you about some of the other toys because Gilbert, before you came on with us, Gilbert and I were talking about like the Wiggle-Ick bobbleheads, and we were looking at the pictures in the book. And I mean, it's so much fun. And this is your first book, Too Much Horror Business. But to go through those pictures, it's not only just fun to see the stuff, but it brings back memories I haven't had, things I haven't thought about.
Yeah.
In 30 years. And Gilbert and I were looking at the page where you have all the Wolfman stuff arranged together. And he's remembering stuff he had.
And I have a signed postcard of the Wolfman, where it says Lon Chaney on it, because in Famous Monsters they once said, Chaney Jr.'s not feeling well. Here's an address, and I sent him a get well card, and got back a little postcard of the Wolfman with his signature on it.
That's the most amazing thing. Wow. He actually
cool?
replied back. Wow.
Was it a stamp?
How cool
or was
is
it
that?
his actual signature?
No, it was an actual signature.
That's very cool.
Wow.
And
I'd like to see that sometime.
Oh, anytime.
We'll make that happen. If you're going to be in New York anytime soon, we'll make that happen.
And I have a friend.
Sooner or later.
I have a friend who, when he was a kid, he met Boris Karloff. And he asked him for an autograph. And Karloff said he would send him one. And then Karloff died. And the day after he died, the autograph showed up at the kid's house, which is the ideal way to get a Boris Karloff.
Yeah, wow.
I love that.
That's an amazing story. Wow. That's crazy. I know this guy who grew up in Beverly Hills, and his father was a famous entertainer, and he was telling me for his 12th year birthday, his parents got him early from school. And said to him, "Happy birthday! Your present is in the kitchen." And he walked into the kitchen, and there, sitting at the table, was Boris Karloff.
Wow!
And this kid was a big Monster fan, and so he just went. He just lost his mind.
That is great.
Wow!
Yeah,
that is great.
How cool is that?
You've gotten to know Sarah a little bit. We had Sarah on the show, and I know she's worked with you in your festival.
Yeah, Sarah, she's such a lovely, lovely, lovely lady.
Yeah, we love her.
And she's so sweet and just so nice to be with. And the great thing is that she's very patient when you ask her a million questions about her father.
Yes.
She's just like really open and willing. And I love that about her.
She is. I love when we had her on the show, and I love that she described Halloween and Christmas as her dad's busy season because of the Grinch.
Yeah.
I just want to say, too, before we move on from this, and that book, and we'll plug it again at the end, Kirk, and our fans, the people that listen to the show are obsessed about the same stuff we're obsessed with.
Oh, well, we had on, because I was demanding to have her on the show.
Oh, he'll love this.
Janet Ann Gallo.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
He knows who she is. You don't even have to tell him.
Yeah. Wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah, we dug her up. We found her.
The little girl.
Well, I'm going to have to find that episode.
Yeah, the little girl from Ghost of Frankenstein.
We'll put you in touch. She's quite chatty. Wow. We had Ron Chaney here. We had Lon Chaney's grandson, Lon Chaney Jr.'s grandson, and we had Vincent Price's daughter, Victoria.
And Bela Jr.
And we had Bela Jr., who obviously you also know.
Wow.
Tell Gilbert, and this before we jump ahead, I just want to say this book with these wonderful toys, the Fright Factory Thing Maker. I mean, the stuff that was bringing back the memories for me. So we want our listeners to find your book, Too Much Horror Business. The Great Garloo, which Gilbert and I remember, the Marx toy and the squirt guns.
Yeah.
But one thing I do want to mention is you had those Outer Spaceman color form figures, which I've been looking for my whole life.
Color form aliens.
The color form aliens. I told my wife, she said, this can't even be real. You must have dreamt them. And we went on eBay, and there they were. Almost impossible to find in the original packaging. You found them.
Yeah, I got those pre-internet. And before the internet, you were able to just kind of network and track stuff down. And then I would say, and I call this the golden age of the of the internet. Between 1998 and 2001, it seems like everyone just wanted to just empty out their attics on eBay because there was so much great stuff that just became available in that 3-year period on eBay, stuff that no one even knew it was worth.
Interesting.
You could get deals, really. And I got a few of those color form figures from eBay, but the ones that are in the package, I got those pre-internet, and those are pretty hard to find.
Very hard to find.
I had all of those as a kid, and yeah, they got destroyed as well. They all got burnt up.
He burned them up. I would kill to get my hands on them. Do you know what I'm talking about, Gilbert? The color forms, they were men from each different planet.
Yes,
there was the Venus had plastic wings in his back.
I
and there
do
was
remember that
a
one.
squid man, octopus kind of deal from Neptune, and just wonderful.
Yes.
The little the Mars guy was a little green man. Those really bring back special memories.
I remember with the Aurora, in the instructions it said, for best results, use Aurora glue. And I remember as a kid, I said, even then I knew that was bullshit. And an advertisement, their glue is different than the others.
Well, also you were an insider because your dad sold models in his hardware store.
Well, this is it. He sold one model. Back then, snorting glue became all the rage with the kids. So a law was passed.
Yep, I remember.
That, you couldn't buy glue unless you were buying a model. And so my father, he worked in a hardware store. He owned a hardware store. He had a little crappy airplane model. And every day, kids would come in. He'd sell them the airplane model and glue, and then he'd count to 5, go outside, and in the trash would be the airplane model, and he'd take it in, and he sold that one model about 100 times.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that time, and I remember my mom saying, there's all these kids out there that are sniffing this glue. You're not doing any of that, Kirk. I'm thinking, why would I want to smell this stuff? It already smells so bad already.
Yeah.
Why would I want more of it?
And you grew up in a drug culture. You grew up in the San Francisco area, and everybody was doing something.
And let me tell you, the one thing that people forget about the whole hippie thing, they remember the long hair, they remember the tie-dye stuff, they remember the free love, they remember the women not wearing, bras. But what they don't recall about the whole hippie thing is none of them wore shoes. None of them. As a child, I would see hippies everywhere. They were all barefoot. And it drove me crazy because, even as a kid, I had a thing about clean feet. All these hippies, they had the dirtiest feet all the time. And I wasn't having any of it.
Yeah. It's an interesting part of your bio and your history that you escaped to the comic book store to get away from your parents' hippie friends.
Yeah, they were everywhere. Really.
Yeah.
I could remember my brother bringing me to a Grateful Dead free concert in Golden Gate Park. And I remember looking around, seeing a lot of people with their faces painted, with flowers and animals, and just thinking, I want to be at that comic book store reading monster magazines right now.
We got a question later about the comic book store that a listener sent in.
And now
We'll ask you about it.
they make the models. Somewhere along the way, they changed it where they make the models now where it's for specific movies. Like the Wolfman model is different than the Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
I didn't even know they were
model.
still making them.
Yeah, I've seen it in these hobby shops where you look.
Well, there's a lot of people, a lot of independent people who make just about every sort of universal character that's out there.
Yeah, it's like you look at the Frankenstein and you go, okay, that's a Karloff, that's a Chaney, that's the Lugosi one. They mold the face.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, nowadays people are so wrapped up in the individual, characters and all the details that, it just makes for a better product. And I love it. I still buy monster models to this day, resin kits. I don't have the time to put them together. I hire someone else. But, once I get that finished kit, it goes up on my shelf and I'm loving it.
That's so cool.
But
don't you wish they still published the Monster Times and Fari Ackerman's
Yes.
magazine?
all that stuff,
Wouldn't it be a better world?
Oh, absolutely. I loved the Monster Times, and I loved that it was in a newspaper
Oh,
format.
yeah.
Now, you must have visited Ackerman.
Did you go to the Acker Mansion?
Yes. I went to the Acker Mansion a few times. I had a little bit of a relationship with Fori. He knew me as, the musician guy who was always asking him about his painting and his artwork, because, I love the magazine covers, and I have the original paintings to a number of them. And
Oh, the Go-Go stuff.
Yeah, the Go-Go's paintings. And that all started by just going over to the Acker Mansion and just kind of like, hearing that Fori needed money, and just kind of innocently saying, hey, Fori, do you want to sell that painting up right there, Famous Monsters number 21? And him saying, let me think about that. $100,000, Kirk. I'm like, what? He goes, ha ha ha. I'll take it for $2,000, or you can have it for $2,000. I'm like, I'll take it for $2,000.
Wow.
Which was back in the 80s, kind of like, relatively, large amount of money for like 1988, 1989 for a piece of original art. That was when the original art market for that kind of stuff wasn't even developed yet.
Yeah.
How much is it worth now?
I have no idea, because those Go-Go's paintings, when they come into my collection, I hang on to them and I don't let them go. And I just think that they're just like the ultimate, and they're an important part of the collection, because Basil Go-Go's, as a standalone artist, I thought was brilliant.
And we just lost him a few months ago.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Then wasn't there that other artist, I think Franzetta?
Oh, Frank Frazetta.
Yeah. He was just like,
he's gone
to
too.
me, he's Frank Frazetta. He's like Norman Rockwell to me. He's the anti-Norman Rockwell, which I just love about him. But the Go-Go's paintings and the Famous Monsters paintings that I have are real important to me, because it puts that aspect of it, Basil Go-Go's personal vision. It shines a light on that, which is I think important in the overall horror fandom, horror genre. His artwork was what attracted me to Famous Monsters as a kid. Those outrageous covers that just jumped out at you, and they're just so striking. And to see those paintings in person, they're just that much more striking.
I've never seen one in person. Have you, Gil? Those Go-Go's paintings, the covers, the old covers? Yeah.
you have to come see the collection. In the next museum opening, there will be a new opening that's coming soon. I can't really talk about it, but
okay.
It'll be actually close to you guys.
Oh, really?
Closer
East
to
Coast.
You guys. Yeah.
Good. We'll make a
I would love to
We'll make a pilgrimage, Kirk.
And you just have to see these paintings because if you're into famous monsters of film, man, they'll just knock you out. And Basil Gogos's process was amazing because a lot of the times he was just working from black and white stills. And you look at these paintings and they're just like in full livid color.
Yeah,
and
can't wait to see them.
Striking color.
Did he work in acrylics or are they oils?
I believe that I believe they worked at both. A lot of his later paintings have a lot of texture to it.
I see.
So I want to say acrylic, but a lot of his earlier stuff doesn't have as much texture. So maybe it was watercolor.
I'd love to see those live.
Oh, absolutely.
Since you brought up Lugosi, Gilbert and I were just talking about White Zombie. First of all, you'll also have to tell us how you acquired those, unless it's a secret. How those the two costumes came into your possession. And just to reiterate for our listeners, you have Bela's costume from White Zombie, and where he was the evil voodoo master, and which Gilbert and I were just talking about. That is a very disturbing film. But you also have Karloff's costume from the Black Cat.
I was able to acquire both pieces in auction. But what really, really just kind of surprised me was just one day I was just paging through this one auction catalog, and just right in the corner with like very little fanfare, it just mentioned the Boris Karloff's outfit for the Black Cat, and when I read that I was like, what? This can't be. I mean, that movie was made over 80 years ago. And I looked at the outfit and I got a magnifying glass out and I looked at the buttons. And then I got a still from the Black Cat with the costume in question. I got a microphone or a microscope out, or a magnifying glass, and I looked at the buttons and the buttons matched up.
Wow.
Wow.
And so I thought to myself, wow, this is the real deal and I can't believe it. And I made it my goal to acquire it, and I did. And
how wild!
The Black Cat is probably in my top 3 Universal horror movies.
It's so.
I love Frankenstein. I love Dracula.
Yeah, the Black Cat. The Black Cat's on another planet.
It's surreal.
It really is. We recommend it all the time to our listeners, and we will again.
It's amazing.
It's like usually the Universal monsters were in an old castle or something, and in the Black Cat, it's all like Art Deco.
Yeah,
it's very strange.
And not only that, there's an overabundance of psychological stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, this pedophilia is touched upon.
Satanism.
Necrophilia. A lot of
incest.
Weird things.
It's pre-code. It must be a pre-code movie for them to have gotten all that stuff in there.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And what's funny is usually my big complaint with movies is I'm constantly seeing a scene and something where I go, oh, that makes no sense, or people wouldn't react that way. The Black Cat makes 0 sense.
You don't mind
from
it.
beginning to end.
Right.
And I don't care. I love the fact that it's insane.
It's wonderful. And it's so atmospheric.
For as insane as it is, it also has a weird sense of realism to it. It's crazy and
black comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, Karloff is just so great. The way he looks, the way he speaks, all his mannerisms. I mean, that his character was based after Aleister Crowley. And the necklace that he wears around his neck is kind of a variation of Aleister Crowley's signature.
Interesting trivia.
Yeah. And I love that aspect about it because no one was making films with that sort of content back then.
No, a film's about Satanism.
Yeah, and I in my mind sometimes I wonder what it would be like to remake that movie, but not change the script at all, just modernize it, just and basically have the same storyline. It would be incredible.
By Karloff Sped, there's a digital clock.
I never noticed that.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
there is.
so interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And White Zombie, by the way, and Gilbert and I were talking about it, not as kinky a movie as The Black Cat, but really unsettling and weird in its own way. And every time I see those zombie workers in the sugar mill, it's so disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
It's so terrifying.
It's like the granddaddy of the zombie film.
Yes, and he's great. And I didn't know this until I started doing the research on you, Kirk. I didn't know that Jack Pierce did Lugosi's makeup.
Yeah, he did.
For that movie.
Yeah, and some of the sets are the Dracula sets as well. And the great thing about White Zombie is the silence.
Yes.
There are moments when it's just so quiet, but it's just so heavy in atmosphere and vibe, and I just love that.
It's the kind of character you want Lugosi to play.
Yes.
Just a guy with no soul, no morality, no moral center whatsoever. He's a human. He's a human monster.
Yeah, just dark and just foreboding and just like not afraid of any sort of like consequence at all. And the name itself, Murder Legendar.
Yeah, it's great. And the Black Cat has its tongue in its cheek a little bit.
Yeah.
It's got a little bit of a sense of humor, but White Zombie is as serious as a heart attack. That he's
absolutely.
just a creep.
But I heard Lugosi was not happy with White Zombie. Or maybe he...
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That's what I heard too. I heard he wasn't... I guess what had happened was it was made by these two brothers, the Halpern brothers, and I think at one point he wasn't satisfied with maybe the dialogue or something. That's what I had heard. But I mean, in that movie, every bit of dialogue that he speaks, it's just so effective. So I don't know what he's talking about. I mean, every time he speaks, you're like hanging on every word.
I wonder why he wasn't happy with it.
Yeah, I never...
He comes off rather well in it.
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely.
And I remember in The Black Cat, there's one part where a bag is falling from the overhead compartment on the train, and the girl screams. And they say something like, "Oh, I thought I'd be crushed." Oh no, she goes, "Oh, I was frightened." And Lugosi goes, "Better to be frightened than crushed."
I always love when he throws the scissors off camera.
Yes.
And you hear the cat.
Yes, they stab a cat.
Yes, that's right.
Stabs a cat. It's such a sick movie. Yeah.
And also Lugosi, where he really, and people forget this, because they always say, "Oh, well, he could only play Dracula." As when he was Igor, it was totally different than anything he had ever done.
And he's good again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, that when he played Igor, for me, it kind of, it was as emphatic as, playing the Frankenstein monster. I mean,
he owned it.
I mean, I really felt sympathy for Igor. And what really killed me was the scene where he's playing the flute and, all of a sudden the monster comes. I mean, how touching is that?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It's a touching moment.
Yeah. He finds those moments in that one.
And Lugosi finds the comedy in Igor. There's some parts that's just really funny, the way he delivers the lines.
Well, I just love it when they said, "Oh, they tried to hang Igor, but they failed."
Oh, yes. They hang
They show
me.
the big broken neck.
They hang me because I rob graves. They say.
Yes, exactly. You hit it.
Two other movies that I found in the research that you like that are near and dear to our hearts are The Incredible Two-Headed Transplant and
Yes.
The Thing with Two Heads,
I love him.
which we're very fond of.
Oh, how great is Bruce Dern?
We
How
had him
great
on. We
is
had him on
Bruce?
the show. We had him here. We asked him about it.
Love it.
Yeah, he has a great sense of
yeah.
humor about it.
He's
How
terrific.
great is Rosie Greer? How
And
great
Ray
is
Milland.
Oh, and Ray Milland. Yeah,
Yeah,
And
that was a genre that came and went.
two heads on a body was a genre.
It was so obvious, too, that
Yes.
Ray Milland is just resting his chin on Rosie Greer's shoulder, and that's the two-headed monster.
It seemed like a good idea at the time. The white bigot was dying, and the black soul brother needed time to prove his innocence.
More power to you, brother. I want to transplant my head on a healthy body. I think I like to donate my body to science after all.
So they transplanted the white head onto the black body. Who would have suspected that neither would care for the idea too much?
What are you guys doing to me? Shut up. Where's the rest of you? We are joined together temporarily.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when they were filming that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and they're both good. Casey Kasem's in. I think Casey Kasem's in The Thing with Two Heads.
Yep. Yeah, that's
He-
right.
he-
He is.
Oh,
He shows up in
and
that.
then the Rosie Greer Ray Milland monster escapes the police on a motorcycle.
Yes. Yes.
Kirk, real quick, I got a couple of questions from fans. We do this thing called Grill the Guest. And these are quick questions. Bjorn Nesheim, he says, Kirk used to hang out at the first all comic book store in the United States, which was the San Francisco Comic Book Company. Does he have a story about the late owner, Gary Arlington?
Yeah, one time I something happened. I had like I don't know. I guess I didn't eat breakfast one day, and I was looking at some comic books and just like literally just like passed out and knocked over a whole stack of comic books. And
Because
next thing-
you weren't eating your lunch. You were spending your lunch money.
yeah, exactly, exactly. You know,
On Erie.
it was connected. Yeah, and the next thing I knew, I woke up and I was at St. Luke's Hospital in San Francisco in the emergency ward on a bed, and there was Gary right next to me. And I looked at him. I said, "What happened?" He said, "You passed out. You knocked over a big old stack of old comic books that we had just bought, and we thought you were like dying on us. So I rushed you. I got you in my Volkswagen, and I drove you over to the hospital. And here we are now." And I looked at him and I thought, "Wow, you're just kind of like." I thought to myself, "Wow, you're just like my dad, but even cooler."
That's a nice story.
Yeah.
That's a nice story about him. We lost Gary too recently.
And the best part about it is that, you know, I was there. He had some comic books for me to look at. He's like, here. These just came in. I was like, really? You're actually
That's
giving me
nice.
some comic books to read? It was amazing.
Gil, where did you buy your comic books? Locally
Oh, yeah.
in Brooklyn?
Yeah, well, the comic books you could buy anywhere.
There was no comic book
then.
store in
Yeah,
those days.
They
Yeah.
were like,
yeah, there were that magazine stands, drugstores.
You know, the old comic rack in the
anywhere.
drugstore.
candy stores.
Yeah, the circular rack.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
And
When I was at Gary's store often, I could remember seeing a whole range of characters going through there. But, you know, the one I remember the most was Robert Crumb.
Oh, you
because,
met
know,
Robert Crumb. That's
well,
right.
you know, I kind of like I just kind of like stayed out of his way because, you know, for me, I wore glasses as a kid, but his glasses just took the cake, and his glasses were so thick, and like, you know, that's what made me really remember him was his glasses and the way he spoke, and I knew that he was an underground artist, and so I stayed out of his way because he was a little intimidating for me as, you know, a little kid.
Yeah, a legend,
but,
sure.
You know, yeah, but he came into the store quite a lot. Him and Gary were very close.
And I remember newsstands would have comic books and monster magazines. And also, you know what I love about the old posters?
Yeah, let's talk about the poster book.
Is that, well, like, there's, It Conquered the Earth, which is a crappy movie with the phoniest looking monster ever.
Is that with Beulah? Oh, It Conquered the World.
Yeah, yes. Conquered the World.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, they always had these lines in it. First, there's a sexy girl lying there in a nightgown that she probably never wore in the movie, and that shows a lot of skin. And the blurb is, it made men prisoners and women slaves. So everything was sex. You know, they'd show a monster and nothing could control its desires.
Yeah, amazing. All those posters, you know, that it seems like in the 50s, the women were either in like bathing suits or slips. It's really,
Yes.
really
There's a lot of that. Yeah, especially in the Cold War stuff.
Yeah,
but those, I have to tell you, the Universal, Gilbert marked the book. Those Universal posters, the French and the Argentinian, are they? The Frankenstein posters? Those are fascinating. Are they the only ones of their kind left?
Amazing. Yeah, those are the only known examples that have survived.
The double panel, are they called?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, World War II did a real number on movie posters, both here in the United States and obviously in Europe. But in the United States, when the war effort was going, they had these things called paper drives, which was basically, you know, people driving through town and recycling paper. And those recycling trucks would stop at the movie poster exchanges, which were where a lot of these posters would live. They were like poster libraries, and the poster exchanges would just come out with huge stacks and just throw them onto the paper trucks and drive off with them. And so that's why there isn't a large amount of movie posters that have survived. And so, you know, a lot of these posters, they're the only ones that have been discovered and found. And so the French double panels are pretty unique in that, you know, one, they're pre World War II, and they have managed to survive all this time. And, you know, two, you know, people didn't really ever think about hanging on to this stuff in the first place. So, I mean, just the fact that it just didn't get thrown into the trash is just a remarkable thing.
Yeah, I'm going to show Gilbert I have the book.
And this is the reason I don't like Hitler.
That's one reason.
Yeah, me too. He really put a damper on German cinema. I mean, they were doing really good with Nosferatu and Metropolis and, you know, Cabinet, Dr. Caligari.
Oh, yeah, they all had to get out of the country.
Yeah, you know.
It's funny. In the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, they offered both of them a chance to live comfortably in Germany if they'd make propaganda films for the Nazis. And so Werner Cross, he decided to stay in Germany and make propaganda. Yeah. Conrad Veidt escaped to America, and where he was most famous playing the German officer in Casablanca. He was very anti-Nazi.
Yes. So was Karl Freund. Karl Freund was also kicked out of Germany, and he worked on the Mummy and Dracula. And Edgar Ulmer, too.
Edgar Ulmer.
Who did The Black Cat. Yeah.
Karl Freund later in his career wound up being the director of photography on I Love Lucy. Isn't that interesting? From The Mummy to I Love Lucy. because they had to work.
And Jack Pierce was the makeup artist in Mr. Ed.
That's right.
Really?
Yeah. Toward the end. Yeah. Yeah. These are the ones we were talking about, the Argentinian poster.
These are great.
The French poster, James Whale's name is misspelled on the French poster, which I guess adds to the value of it.
Well, it was a later addition. If you look at that poster, the original director, Robert Florey, who actually wanted Bela Lugosi to play the monster, he gets a credit on that poster.
Yes.
But what had happened is Carl Laemmle, for some reason or another, I can't remember, wanted James Whale on the project. And so Robert Florey got replaced by James Whale. And James Whale was the one who saw Boris Karloff eating in the Universal cafeteria and said, "You're the guy to play the monster." But
and history was made.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the French double panel posters I like a lot because
Beautiful.
Graphically they kind of have a different perspective than a lot of the American posters. It just kind of like they just look kind of like I don't know, more colloquial.
Was one of the Frankenstein posters found in an abandoned movie house in Canada? Do I have that right? In a projection room?
Yeah, it was a walled-off projection booth, and it was I guess a projection booth that people knew were there, but I guess they just there was no reason for them to like tear down the wall or look inside this empty room until just recently someone tore down the wall, stepped inside, and right there on the wall was a Frankenstein 3 sheet.
Amazing.
And,
amazing.
How incredible is that? I mean, I wish something like that would happen to me.
I was telling Gilbert, it's fascinating, and equally fascinating is the story of where the Mummy poster turned up when the guy was remodeling his house.
Yeah, it's amazing because I have movie posters that have been found in New Zealand, in Iran, in Sweden, just all over the place. And these are American posters. They're American issue. I have a whole slew of half sheets that were found underneath a floor in New Zealand.
It's fascinating.
The Mummy 3 sheet that I have was found in Sweden, of all places, and that's just strange to me because Sweden had their own movie poster production house. They printed and designed their own movie posters, and I've seen the original Swedish movie poster to the Mummy. So for Sweden to have an American poster and a 3 sheet, it's just kind of like, it almost seems like a mistake, like they got sent this poster by accident and they kind of like threw it in a corner and just forgot about it until it was found, decades later. And, and I managed to acquire it. But it's crazy because this stuff, it's just, you never know where it's going to come from.
Well, one of the sad things I was saying to Gilbert, too, is a lot of times in those days, the artists didn't sign their work and they were anonymous. You didn't know.
Yeah.
In some cases you do, but in many cases, nobody knew who was painting these things. Just studio artists, grunts, people who were grinding out a check.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, it's just it's a real shame, because these people had no idea just how much their artwork meant to people. I have a feeling that it was just another gig for them. Just like break it out, get it done, and move on to the next thing.
I got to ask you a music question, Kirk. You said anybody who plays or listens to heavy metal music understands horror films because it's the same shades of dark and light.
Yeah, it's the same elements. It's the same group of emotions. It's the same sort of emotional dynamics. It's the building of tension and releasing it. It's it's the energy that you feel that's maybe at the same sort of a pulse as a racing heart,
When you went into audition for Metallica, the bass player was reading a Lovecraft story, and you had an instant connection. You said, "These guys, I'm simpatico with these guys."
I remember when I flew out to audition for Metallica. I remember arriving. Shaking hands with the guys, going into the room and playing music for 2 or 3 hours, and then coming out going, wow, that was kind of mind-blowing. And then just taking a moment and sitting down and looking around, and then seeing Cliff Burton with his head in a Call of Cthulhu Dungeons and Dragons rule book. And I instantly said, hey, I have that book. I know that game, Call of Cthulhu. And he looked at me and said, yeah, H.P. Lovecraft, man. And I said, yeah, I know H.P. Lovecraft. I love him. And he goes, I do too. And then he said, I love zombies. And I said, I do too. And then constantly went into his whole day, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead sort of like tribute. And I knew I had found a kindred soul.
You knew you belonged with that group.
Yeah,
that's a great story. I got just one more question about Metallica. This is from my sister-in-law's boyfriend begged me to ask this. Can you recall, he loves And Justice for All. This is from Brendan Brown. Can you recall any of the thought process, and this is a tough, probably something that needs a long answer, but maybe you can give me a short one. Any of the thought process that led to the sound, the special sounds on And Justice for All? Because the record redefined metal recording, in his opinion.
Special in quotation marks. It's really funny because when we were recording that album, James, the guitar player, went for a very unique sort of guitar sound. And, Lars wanted his drums to sound like very dry and upfront as well. And, those two unique sounds put together created a sort of tonal palette where when you added more bass frequencies, it just kind of muddied up the mix. And so as a result of that, you can't really hear our bass player very much. As that album, turned out the way it turned out, we thought we had made a really kind of like, unique and different album that sounded nothing like our previous 3 albums. And, unbeknownst to us, I guess that people have used the sound of that album as a template for their own albums. And I didn't even realize this until someone brought it up to my attention only about 10 or 15 years ago. We just thought that we just looked at it as kind of like a sonic experiment to try for one album, but it wasn't anything that we were going to hang our hats on for the next, 2 or 3 decades. It was more kind of like a place where our heads were at sonically. And as a result of it, a lot of people really like the way that album sounds. In retrospect, I admire our audacity at trying something so different. But our next album kind of filled in for what we were missing from And Justice for All.
I see.
And so I'll just put it that way.
That's interesting.
But like I said, a lot of people really, really are attracted to the sound of that album, and there's nothing really. It's not a warm sounding album. It's really upfront and in your face, and it's hard to get away from when you listen to it loud.
Well, he's gonna love that answer.
Like that.
He's gonna love that answer. And I have to say, Enter Sandman is a piece of work that sounds very much like it was written by people who embrace horror, who understand it.
Yeah. Or let's just say the darker side of life.
Yes, very.
That's more inclusive.
Very, very much so. Gil, you want to ask him about Dwight Fry?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Who died young on a bus.
One of the all-time greats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I think...
On a bus?
He died on a bus. He had a heart attack.
I think they had it listed in the paper as toolmaker Dwight Fry. They didn't even have him like as an actor. And it was so funny. He started out big, like Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula.
Yep.
And then he started just popping up like in the horror sequels, like he'd be like one of the villagers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, like an extra or something.
Yeah.
It's a strange short career he had.
Yeah, and I heard he was supposed to be a very skilled song and dance man.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah, I heard that he came out of theater and Broadway.
I got to look that up.
He did that whole circuit, and then it just became an actor. But you're right. I mean, when I think about Dwight Fry, I can't really think of any movies past like 1936, 1937 that he was in.
No.
Maybe it wasn't he in like some Monogram stuff. Maybe like the Vampire Bat or something.
He may have. Yeah.
I can't picture Renfield breaking into song.
But I have to say, he was a large part of that movie Dracula.
Yeah.
I mean, his portrayal of Renfield was brilliant, and the scene I'm talking about when he is discovered on the ship and he's glaring up at the people. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
All right, Kirk. In the time we have left, we're going to give you one wild card. These are three movies we've talked about on this show, and we'd love you to comment about them. And you could pick one, or comment on all three: The Tingler, Freaks, or Island of Lost Souls.
How about all three?
Okay.
Okay, so I remember when I first saw The Tingler on television, and I was just so disappointed that I wasn't seeing it in a movie theater with that tingling sensation, because I'd read all about it.
Oh, right, with the wired
Famous
seats.
Monsters. Yeah, and and when I actually had seen it, I was just thinking, wow. I wish I would have been in the theater and actually have experienced it the way that they, the makers wanted the viewer to experience it. But what's interesting about the Tingler is they mentioned LSD in it, lysergic.
That's correct.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and by the way, Bob Burns was one of those guys wiring those seats,
Oh, wow.
which he told us.
Oh, really?
They were airplane motors.
And so,
the things that made made the chairs vibrate.
wow, amazing.
And
So they're talking about LSD. So I'm just wondering, could it be like some weird MK Ultra propaganda sort of like weird kind of like drug CIA FBI thing that was connected to this movie? Probably not.
And of course, the greatest scene, they're in a movie theater, and the picture goes out, and Vincent Price frantically informs the audience, scream for your lives. The Tingler is loose in the theater. Scream for your lives. And then it immediately goes to, we now resume our film.
Did you ever hear a better Vincent Price than that, Kirk?
That's really good. That's really great. Actually.
Real quick, give us something on Island of Lost Souls, which Gilbert loves.
Well, I love when Bela Lugosi's screaming about the House of Pain and "Are we not men?"
Yes.
And
It's creepy.
And whenever he screams, "Are we not men?" These days, I want to scream back, "No, we are Devo, DEVO."
Yeah,
That's right.
he
They
goes,
co-opted that.
Yes. The House of Pain. They made us in the House of Pain. Not men, not beasts, things.
That's perfect.
Wow, that's really, really great. You have it down.
Doesn't he have it down?
Yeah, and I really believe again, Lugosi steals that film.
Oh, he
from
does.
for myself.
He does.
And what is the law? Not to spill blood. That is the law. And I heard that I think Charles Lawton based his performance of the Mad Doctor on his dentist.
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Really?
That's weird.
Wow. I'm glad that dentist is probably not around anymore.
And Freaks.
Yeah. What? You give us one comment or one insight on Freaks.
Well, that one of the last scenes when all the freaks are out and it's raining and Prince Rainier is doing his hobble. That's the guy without the arms and legs.
Yeah,
he's hobbling from side to side with a razor in his mouth. Oh my God, that was just like the ultimate for me.
That movie's ahead of its time.
There.
Don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the audiences weren't ready for that, for that kind of subject matter?
Absolutely not. And I remember that was one of the movies I picked when I was on with Robert Osborne.
That's right.
And it's one of those movies where even if there's not a scary thing happening, you're still a little scared. It has you on edge the whole time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I was just in constant marvel anytime any of the freak characters came on screen. I mean, it's just like, I was just blown away by the fact that those are real people and they're not really even acting.
No.
and the ending, number one, they make the woman into a half chicken.
Yeah.
And I heard that was a chicken suit that Lon Chaney Sr. built.
Wow.
He was planning a movie.
Good trivia.
And what they cut out of the movie was that the strong man at the end is singing soprano. So it means that the freaks castrated him.
Wow.
I wonder if that footage still exists.
It might. That to me,
wow.
I was glad they didn't keep that in because I want the freaks to be a little sympathetic.
A little bit.
And if they cut a guy's dick off, I can't really root for them.
That's crossing a line for you?
Yeah.
So we'll tell our listeners to check out the Black Cat, White Zombie, Freaks, and Island of Lost Souls, if they haven't by now. 200
and the
episodes.
Wolfman.
And, of course, the Wolfman, 200 episodes in. By the way, he does a great Maria Ouspenskaya.
And though you can't forget the thing with two heads.
And the thing with two heads.
Oh, that's right.
Transplant.
Incredible two-headed
Maria Ouspenskaya, I was the only kid who could imitate.
Listen to this, Kirk.
Yeah, yes.
She was amazing, by the way.
Yes.
The way you walk is thorny, through no fault of your own. But as the rain enters the soil, the river enters the stream. So tears go on to a predestined end. Find peace for a moment, my son.
Look, I wish our listeners could see the look on Kirk's face.
I'm just thinking, if I would have known you, Gilbert, as a kid, I think we would have probably been inseparable.
Did you really want to know another kid who was doing Maria Ouspenskaya impressions?
Well, I would just let me just go on to say that I as a kid. And I'm sure that all his horror fans could relate. I spent so much time imitating Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, the Wolfman. Who didn't get the ace bandages and start wrapping their hands?
And start dragging your foot behind you.
Yeah. And so I just
Well, I wish you guys had known each other as kids. But that's one of the great things about this show, Kirk, is that we get to meet the other monster kids. We get to identify them.
Yeah.
and bring them in. So anything to plug? What's coming up? You guys are on tour?
I just want to say that, I left out something about, the Black Cat costume is that once I finally did acquire it, the first thing I did was put it on. And it actually fit me.
Wow.
And I walked around the house.
That's cool.
For like an hour, just pretending I was Boris Karloff in the Black Cat. So
that's fantastic.
Wow.
How did it fit?
It actually fit me, which was crazy because I'm 5'7". I know Karloff was like maybe 5'10", 5'11", but I always knew that he was a slim guy too, and so I was able to like put it on and walk around without busting any seams or anything like that. So I was happy.
So if we make a pilgrimage out to the house, you're going to let Gilbert try on the Karloff costume from the Black Cat?
I'll break out the tape measure and measure his waist really quick to make sure that it's compatible. And then we'll go for there.
Let me plug the books. The Too Much Horror Business, which is fantastic. You will lose days looking at it. It's on Amazon. It's in bookstores. Please patronize bookstores. Also, It's Alive, which we have here. Classic horror and sci-fi movie posters from the Kirk Hammett collection, which Gilbert is absolutely fascinated by.
Oh, yes.
And I'm going to let him take it home and play with it. And
I beg your pardon?
What?
I usually go home and play with it.
What's going on with touring the exhibit and your yearly festival and anything else you want to put out there?
Well, the collection just finished a really great run at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, and that's wrapped up now. And we're getting ready to do another show on the East Coast. When we finalize everything, then I can actually tell you where it's going to be.
Yeah,
but it is going to be on the East Coast, and then it's going to go to a few other museums, and so we have a pretty busy schedule as far as the museum exhibits and the collection are concerned. It's going to run till like 2020, and this is like 3 or 4 different places. So hopefully you'll come to a place close to you guys because it will be on the East Coast.
We got to get there. We got to go see those Go-Go's paintings in person.
And one day I'll have to show you my Lon Chaney Jr. autograph.
Oh, totally would love to see that. And, just get together and do some imitations and impressions.
Yes.
In all your travels, Kirk, and you've been pursuing this a long time. Did you ever meet anybody who did Maria Uspenskaya?
It is a first. Absolutely. I have a friend on the East Coast who does a pretty good, Igor. I asked him to do Elena Vertigo, but he wouldn't do it.
Oh, that's funny. You don't even do that one.
So hey, Elena Vertigo, guys, come on. Who is she?
Oh, she was in The Wolfman.
Yes,
exactly. She just died. She died last year.
Yes, she did.
Wasn't she in House of Frankenstein?
Exactly, yes.
Very good.
She was in the House of Frankenstein.
And J. Carol Nash is in love with her.
Yes.
She was. Elena Verdugo was also Marcus Welby's nurse on Marcus Welby, MD.
Yes.
And didn't she also sell coffee?
I don't know about that.
She was in those coffee commercials.
That might have been Mrs. Olsen.
But her family, at one point, her family owned like half of the land that Universal Studios is on.
Wow.
Way back in the day, her family was, I guess, they had a huge ranch in that area.
Well, Kirk, when you're this way, either with the band or by yourself, we'll do another one of these. We can talk about Val Lewton.
Would love to.
We didn't get into the Black Sleep, and we could do a 6-hour show with you because you're one of those guys.
Yes. I love the Black Sleep, by the way. And again, John Carradine, I thought was just such a great actor. He could play anything, and he was so convincing.
And Tor is in that one, right? Tor Johnson.
Tor Johnson.
Yeah.
Chaney Jr.
I've never seen it. Shame on me. I got to catch up to the Black Sleep.
And when you watch Carradine, each time I watch him, I go, see, it was funny because both Carradine and Chaney Jr. were both in that. And
Yes.
Lon Chaney Jr. seemed like a miserable drunk, a depressed, angry drunk,
Yeah.
whereas Carradine seems like the happiest drunk on the planet. Like he seems blasted in most of the film.
He's got a body of work, that guy.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Well, you know, when you saw him later on, you know, he did a lot of cameos in like the 70s and whatnot. You know, he always seemed like he was so happy to be in those cameo positions. I think he's in is it The Howling or maybe
yes,
he's in The Howling.
I think it was he's in The Howling. He's great in The Howling because he looks like he's playing himself.
And he's the only one, and I couldn't believe they didn't have the rest of them there, like Chaney and Karloff. He's the only one of the horror stars who pops up in the Munsters.
Yes, he's Mr. Gateman.
Yes.
Yeah, the head of the funeral director.
Right.
Yeah,
That's right. You know?
He was Herman Munster's boss.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
You know, and for a second, he's in Bride of Frankenstein.
Yes,
he's
he
one
is.
of the hunters that discovers the monster with the hermit.
Blink and you miss him.
Yes, it's the monster. Yeah, he's one of them.
We could do 7 hours talking to you about this stuff, Kirk. It's fun. I hope you had fun.
Well, let's consider this, episode 1.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Gilbert's going to plug the book one last time.
Okay. It's Alive. Classic horror sci-fi movie posters from the Kirk Hammett collection.
It is absorbing, and they're just great to see those posters.
And now I guess I do the wrap-up.
You do the wrap-up.
Well, this is Gilbert Gottfried. This has been Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast with my co-host, Frank Santopadre. And we've been talking to a guy who is a member of Metallica, but much more important, he's old monster movie freak. Kirk Hammett.
Kirk, do you know a book called Heavy Metal Movies?
Heavy metal movies.
It's a book you'll like. We're going to send. It's written by one of our staffers, Mike McPadden. We're going to send you a copy. You'll love it.
Oh, thank you so much. It sounds like I will.
It's something right up your alley. And this was fun. Our listeners have been saying, "Get Kirk Hammett," and we got you, and we're happy we did.
Okay, you know, I'm really, really glad that I had this a chance to like sit and talk to you two fine gentlemen about what means the most in life. And, you know, I hope that we can take it up again and you know, maybe we'll solve the Earth's problems with our conversation, our next conversation.
Well, let us know when you're this way, and we'll call it part 1.
Definitely.
Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you.